God bless you and welcome again to another show of the Brinson Institute. I'm your host, Apostle Dr. Sylvester Paul Brinson III, the Dean of the Brinson Institute. I'm glad again to come into your homes wherever our voices are being heard by radio and also seen by this streaming network. I am excited today. I know that every month you see us, but today I am most excited and happy. I have two brothers who are just my big brothers, a big brother, little brothers. We go way, way back in the struggle in the community, and I'm just excited to have them. And they're coming on our show. Don't you turn that dial. Don't you move. You're about to be in for a treat on something new and something different and something exciting. I'd like to welcome my guests to the Brinson Institute, the Reverend Dr. Albert Sampson, Al Sampson.
Yes, God
Amen.
bless. Thank you.
And the Reverend Dr. Julius J. Smith.
God bless you, my brother.
Okay, and so these are my friends. We go way, way back. And I just thought that I wanted them to come on our show, the Brinson Institute, and just talk. They represent history. And one of the things that's exciting to me, most of you all that are acquainted with your history, you know about Dr. Martin Luther King. Well, with Dr. Martin Luther King and head of his organization, the Reverend Al Sampson was one of those persons that worked within his organization. He'll tell you more about it himself, but he has the distinct privilege of Reverend, our good friend and brother and leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, in his organization. Reverend Dr. Al Sampson was the only one that he ordained in his organization. That's historical. Reverend Al Sampson, tell us something about yourself.
Well,
Share your heart.
Yeah, I want first of all, obviously, I want to thank you, Apostle, for giving me this opportunity with my longtime friend, Julius Smith, Reverend Dr. Julius Smith. I'm originally from Massachusetts. Went to school in an integrated community in a little town called Everett. And then I'm an adopted child. My real mother got violated as a young girl in a place called Melrose, Massachusetts. So my father, whose name was Paul, was really my uncle. And I only saw my mother 3 times in the mental hospital.
Wow.
And my calling is really my liberation.
Okay.
1956, I was in high school, Everett High School in Everett, Massachusetts. I participated in the oratorio contest. First time, I did it the year before. I had a stuttering problem. People laughed at me and they rejected me. And I went back again, and I won the oratorio contest on Friday the 13th before 1,300 students,
Right.
and I was the 13th speaker.
Okay, wow.
That night, I went to Emmanuel Baptist Church, where at that time it was Pastor Earl Wesley Lawson. You'll be glad to know this. He was a Morehouse graduate.
Yes,
He was with Dr. King
yes.
when Dr. King was with him at Morehouse in Atlanta. And what ended up happening, I read from the 13th chapter of Corinthians. We had a guest revivalist named Brother Hero from Taunton, Massachusetts. Long story short, he ended up, after preaching in the Baptist church, he asked, does anybody want prayer? So you know everybody has to get up. Otherwise you look silly. Where the man asks everybody to pray and you ain't coming forward to pray. So I went down the aisle with everybody else. He started from the left side and went all the way, and when he got to me, he said, one day you're going to be a great preacher. And that blew me away, because I always saw myself as Peck's bad boy. And so that night, I came home, telephone rang. I lived at 13 Baldwin Avenue. I started walking up the steps. I picked up the telephone. It was the Reverend Dr. Grady Demas Davis, who was the pastor of Zion Baptist Church in Everett, Massachusetts. And Mama used to have him over for dinner because him and Dr. Larson were friends. And he said to me, I know you're graduating this year because you're a senior in high school. He said, and I want you to come to Shaw University, where I'm now the dean of the School of Religion. I said, well, I really can't. I just got called into the ministry, and I got to find me a Bible college. He laughed. He said, you don't understand. Shaw is the university in Raleigh, North Carolina, is the oldest Bible school in Black America.
Wow.
He said, and I want you to come on down because we're going to help you with scholarship. And that made my heart happy because I was able to work out. So 1957 to 61, I was a student at Shaw University. And I ended up moving into leadership position. I was president in NAACP on the campus at Shaw, where SNCC was born. Julian Bond and John Lewis and a lot of other brothers and sisters. Met Jesse Jackson, who was a transfer student from Champaign-Urbana to A&T in Atlanta. In Greensboro, North Carolina. You remember the three boys sat down in Greensboro, North Carolina, and a brother named James Fox and I sat down in Raleigh, North Carolina. One of the interesting things, we became legislators for a week because Raleigh was the capital of North Carolina. And they had this program where all of the college students got selected to be the legislator for the week. We ended up with the black students because of segregation. The black students came to Shaw and they came to St. Augustine, which were the two black schools in Raleigh, North Carolina. And that's where they stayed for the week. The genius of that moment was we ended up learning Robert's Rules of Order, how to make a motion, how to second a motion. And because they had segregated the hotels, we passed the first Public Accommodations Act in North Carolina. And as a result of that, we ended up desegregating the hotels the next year. And we elected a man named John Winters as the first black councilman in North Carolina at the town of Raleigh. So that's kind of like my privilege and my pilgrimage of how I got here.
Okay.
You know, and then
So what got you to SCLC? I understand. Tell us about that.
well,
How did you?
well, one of the key people who was in my life and who preached my graduation sermon at Shaw was a man named Dr. Vernon Johns. And Dr. Vernon Johns, if you remember at that time, was pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Vernon Johns was a preacher that had an economic mind. And he preached one time, for example, with Sandy Ray up in New York, Concord Baptist Church in New York. He told Sandy Ray, I don't need no money. I want to do a revival at Concord Baptist Church in New York, but I don't need any money. And Sandy said, well, I take a collection every night. He said, I don't need it. He said, well, how are we going to be? He said, I'm going to bring 2,000 watermelons and selling them at $5 a piece from the south up to the north. And he taught me how to have an economic mind as a preacher. And sure enough, that's what he did. And he became the man that had a lot of impact on my life and my theology. So when I graduated from Shaw, I went back to Massachusetts, worked in the factory, and I read an article in Ebony magazine by the brother Lerone Bennett, another one of your Morehouse graduates. And Lerone Bennett talked about a seminary called the Interdenominational Theological Center. And I literally applied to go to the seminary because it was the first time I saw a predominantly black school in Atlanta, and I'm all the way in Massachusetts. I took a bus because it was the longest bus ride in my life. And when I got down there, I was able to work at Grady Hospital. We did pastoral counseling at the hospital because I was a seminary student. And we also, I worked at Butler Y in order to pay for my books and et cetera.
Well, tell them what Butler YMCA is.
Yeah, it's a Y where people came and did a whole lot of youth activities, and they had dinners there, breakfasts and lunches, and moving with speakers from all over the country.
And it's a black YMCA.
Oh, most
so to bring us up to speed, because we got a little time. So, what time frame are we working?
But let me just finish this one last point. One of the things that happened while I was there, I met a man who was my professor named Bishop Joseph Johnson, who had 4 doctorates in New Testament theology. Brothers, never in my life, and I've been all over the world, I've never met anybody who had 4 doctorates in New Testament theology. And during those days, when you got a doctorate, it was because you knew the languages, Hebrew, Greek and Aramaic, okay? Mm-hmm. So I literally raised my hand in the class heading into my second year, and I said, Doc, I got everything on the Bible because I came out of Shaw, but I'm only stuck on, did Jesus die, go on the cross, die, and resurrect? Well, he told it to me in those different languages. He told it to me because he came out of Iliff College where Vince Harding went, Dr. Vince Harding. And then he ended up saying, Grandma told me, Reverend, that he rose. When I was a little boy in Sunday school in Commerce, Georgia. He rose, Reverend, he rose. And he tore the class up. The brothers, we called it hooping in those days. So I raised my hand again. The brother said, what are you doing now? What do you want to ask him? I said, Doc, I'm coming out of seminary because with all the sense you got, I don't need to be up in here all hours of the day working and going to school. So I'm coming out of seminary. Then I met Dr. Charles B. Kofer, who looked at the Bible from African eyes. He was one of my professors. So I literally walked out of the classroom because I was executive secretary of the NAACP and president of the State Youth and College in North Carolina. I got the job as executive secretary of the Atlanta branch of NAACP. We desegregated the schools there with Reverend C.T. Vivian's wife, and I met her husband, Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was charge of the affiliates and chapters of SCLC all over the country. And when I left the NAACP, I joined SCLC, and to make a long story short, I walked into Dr. King's office in in 1966, and I asked him. I said, "Doc, I'm 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 like I've never been ordained, and I need you to ordain me." He didn't say nothing to me. He just went to the phone and picked it up and made arrangements at Ebenezer Baptist Church, January 2nd, 1966, with a brother named Walter McCall. And there's another brother named Albert Love. Those two brothers were assistant pastors at his daddy's church, Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. But I was the only one that he ordained that was a part of his organization. His wife, Coretta King, gave me a Martin Luther King watch. And as far as I know, I'm the only preacher in America where Dr. King gave me, wife, Coretta King, gave me the watch. So I have the blessing, but I also have the burden. I've studied all of Dr. King's works, his sermons, and etc. And I'm trying to live my life in my ministry as if Martin was there. What would Martin do?
So we were teaching a class on last night, which is ironic, talking about apostles and the apostolic mantle of a spiritual apostolic son or daughter. That the son or daughter of an apostolic leader must carry that leader's mantle.
Right.
That God calls the vision to the visionary and then find people and persons to go be a part of the vision through his vessel. And when that person leaves, the legacy must continue the mantle. So then we would be safe to say that in this process that you are walking, carrying a mantle that was bequeathed to you in spiritual matters when you were laid hands upon to be consecrated, that the consecration carried the impartation of a burden, of a vision.
With the burden of, I believe in nonviolence as a way of life.
You got to pay the price.
Yes. And the deep part about it is, not only do I believe in nonviolence as a way of life, but Martin Luther King's last book was, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, which for me is an economic proposition that churches need to be responsible for, because he did his ministry through the church, what I call the church of liberation. The other interesting thing about your point about the apostleship legacy, heritage, is we have to have a method of showing and teaching our people about freedom and liberation and responsibility. So I understand that dimension of Martin's life for it to be applicable in my life, in my ministry. So I'm happy to know that because of you and I having the historical relationship we've had for all these years, that you are allowing me to come into a process where you have laid the groundwork of this whole discipleship, apostleship, and responsibility, because our people within the African American community, as Africans in America, I call it ABC, Africans of the homeland, Blacks in America, and Caribbean brothers and sisters, ABC. And we have an opportunity and a responsibility. I'm one of the biblical scholars for the original African Heritage Bible. We have enough information now, Brother Apostle, that Moses was not Charleston Heston. Elizabeth Taylor was not the Queen of Sheba. Jesus was not born in Europe with blonde hair and blue eyes.
Michelangelo's cousin.
He was born in Bethlehem of Judea, which is up the street from Ethiopia, around the corner from Egypt. And we went there, and we documented with the Hebrew Israelites who in America several of them left Chicago in 1968 and ended up in Dimona. We met them. They learned the language, the rituals of the whole Jewish faith, because you know the Bible in the Old Testament is Hebrew. And then then we went to De La Rosa. There's 12 steps in the crucifixion of Jesus. We went to the 9th step and met the Ethiopian priest. And then we met the Aramaic people, who are copper people that look like us. And they gave me the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. And at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the largest language class at Lincoln is the Aramaic class, because you know Lincoln is where Kwame Nkrumah went to seminary, and it's amazing, because with the looking at the Bible from African eyes, it gives us a basis of being inside biblical history as we struggle with the whole cultural history that of who am I and what am I to do with me.
Well, you know, Al, it's interesting. I thought, Julius, were you with us? We went to the Holy Land.
Yes.
I was there.
We were, all three of us was in the Holy Land. Now, you remember that experience.
Don't forget Jordan.
Dr. Jordan. And remember that. Remember that experience. Remember when we left Jerusalem. We went to Jerusalem, and we went on the camels.
Yes.
And they said, we're going down to Jericho.
Yes.
And I tell this story all the time. We went to Jericho,
Yes.
and we were riding in the bus, and we kept seeing these houses that looked like Mississippi.
Yes, sir.
Remember that?
Yes.
Remember the little
Yes.
boy that was chasing us, trying to see us, and we was like, you said stop the bus
Yeah.
and let us get out. And the driver said, no. We're not stopping the bus. Al said, we gonna stop the bus. And we bum rushed the driver. We made the driver stop the bus. Y'all remember that?
Yes.
And we got out. We was in Jericho.
Come on now.
And we sat with them people who were color like us, and they danced with us. Remember, we laughed and we talked, and we said, wow, black folk of colors in Jericho. And then they try to keep us in charge. Remember, we snuck back.
Yes.
And we met with the Coptic priests.
Yes.
At night, we had to get our own cab. Remember the night we went out looking for some chicken, and we was Baptist, we preachers in the Holy Land. So we want no fish. We want some chicken. We walked all over China, and when they got it, it was all burnt. Y'all remember that?
Yes, sir.
I just want Julius say something.
We saw some black children on a hill.
Yeah.
In Jericho.
In Jericho.
Yes.
And we asked the man who were playing the drums and all of that, and we said, well, how long have black people been here? He said, what do you mean? I said, how long have black people been here? He said, forever. Forever. When were we not here?
Yes.
And we went to Nazareth. Now, you know, Nazareth reminds you of the Robert Taylor homes. Remember?
Yeah.
They were hanging all out the street.
And one way out.
And the high rises and the curtains blowing out the window, the fans, and they would have said, can any good thing come out of Nazareth?
Yes.
We saw all people of color. We was like, are we down here on 43rd and State?
And we can't.
We down in Mississippi because they look just like us. They talk like us.
And we can't ever forget, with the brothers and sisters in Dimona, they took us to the Dead Sea.
Yes, remember.
But they called it the Sea of Life.
That's right.
Because of Sodom and Gomorrah.
That's right. And the minerals.
It's salt.
That's right.
And people from all over the world come to be healed because you can never drown
in that water.
And
it's 70-some degrees.
Come on, brother. And it's the Sea of Life.
Isn't it something?
And not the Dead Sea.
But isn't it something that when you look at the biblical text and we talk about Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed because of sin, that the residue of Sodom and Gomorrah is now the Dead Sea, which is the Sea of Life. And people come from all over the world to sit in the water.
Yes.
to be healed from whatever sickness, almost like the pool of Bethesda.
Yes.
It's just that the angel is always there.
That's right.
Now, that's exciting. We're going to talk about that something. Dr. Julius, come on, say something. We got about 4 or 5 minutes left for this show. We're going to have to do a part 2, but tell us. So I guess I'm excited because we go way back. We was in the Holy Land together.
Yes.
We went to
Yes.
Korea, a couple of other things we did. But as, and Al, you were like, what, 78 years old now?
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
66. So now when Al was talking, most of the people that he talked about are now gone.
Right.
So he's bringing you up to history because he's a historian. So when you read in your books about Black history and African history and the history in America and stuff, you'll hear some of the names. He was there. And so that's why I wanted him to come. So now let's talk for those of us who's here. What do you see the state of the church, the community? Where are we now? And where do we need to go? Dr. Smith, talk to us. You from Morehouse.
Yes, I am. And it's funny that when Dr. Sampson talks about the people he met, Dr. Lawson, Dr. J. Joseph Smith, and ITC and all of that, I crossed some of those paths too. However, I didn't cross them at the same time. I didn't go through there at the same time that he went.
About 10, 15 years
so
later.
I went to Morehouse after going to Kendall College in Evanston. And to make a long story short, I was actually called in Chicago on 47th Street under the L. Almost sound like a Richard Pryor story.
That's all right.
However, and at the time, I was just a kid just running around 45th Street, went to Forestville High School under Barbara Sizemore, a great woman educator and a great educator, and Anderson Thompson.
My son goes to his school.
And a lot of other dedicated teachers, educators who stayed there on the South Side, which they call the ghetto, or people call the ghetto, and taught us and inspired us. And so I didn't even think that I could even go to college at the time. But a brilliant woman, assistant principal and principal Beverly Daniels, said to me, says, you smart, you ought to go to college.
What school was that?
At Forestville High School.
Okay.
And then she said, I know about this school in Evanston. It's Kendall College. That's where Sherman Beverly and others were teaching.
Now, see, we run out of time already. We've got 2 legacies right here in the room. We haven't even began. So, we're going to do a part 2. You tune in next week and see this show. We're going to move to part 2. But this is to show you that if you walk by faith, if you stand in the community, if you do some things that you need to do, that you can make it. And we got about a minute and a half. We got about a minute and a half left. Anybody want to say something, look in that camera and say something. You got about a minute and a half to make a point.
Well, what I'd like to say, it's time for us to focus on the future, and we need to invest in the African American community. I know it's a great time of protest, particularly under the Trump administration in the White House and around the world, but we need to invest in African American communities around the world, in the Pan-African world. We need to invest in our families, invest in African American and Black institutions, and we need to have an economic agenda. Those 3 things especially, I think, will bring us through, and when I say institutions, the church is the first institution, because you can't go forward without God. God has delivered every people on the face of the earth.
And so, therefore, those of you that have been watching us and listening to us, we're just excited. And as the Dean of the Brinson Institute, I am committed to bring you a cross-fertilization of some historical dimensions of our people. Those of you that are watching us all over the world, you need to know about some of our history, some of the struggle that we have gone through. But because of that, regardless of where you are, whatever culture you're in, whatever your experience is, God is still good. If you stay with him, he'll bring you out. So until next time, remember, Go with God, and He will lead you if you let Him.